In the howling darkness of the 41st millennium, there exists a terror so complete that even the Chaos Gods whisper its name with something approaching reverence. It is not death they fear. Death is merciful, an ending that brings peace. It is not pain. Pain passes with time's cruel march. What haunts the nightmares of demon princes and makes even the ruinous powers check the shadows behind them is the promise of perfect, inescapable justice delivered by something that was once their brother. Right now, as you listen to these words, somewhere in the galaxy, a word-bearer is screaming prayers to gods who cannot save him from the judgment that approaches on wings of living shadow. A Black Legion champion is discovering that 10,000 years of corruption cannot hide him from eyes that see through dimensions human minds cannot perceive. A demon prince who thought himself beyond mortal reach is learning that some hunters evolve alongside their prey, becoming something that makes damnation itself seem like mercy. The Imperium counts its Primarchs like a miser counts coins. 9 lost to chaos, 2 erased from history itself, 7 who remain to guard humanity's failing light. But their mathematics are wrong. There was always a 19th, and he was never lost. He was becoming something that would make his brother's transformations into demon princes look like children playing dress-up in their parents' clothes. Every imperial citizen knows the litanies. The Emperor protects, the bolter fires true. Death is only the beginning of duty. But there is another truth, whispered in the deepest bunkers where commissars fear to tread, carved into the armor of veterans who have seen too much, tattooed over the hearts of soldiers who know that some wars are fought in dimensions where light itself fears to shine. They speak of the Pale Hunter, the thing that stalks through the warp hunting traitors with the patience of entropy and the precision of divine mathematics. Subscribe now and stand witness, because what you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about loyalty, transformation, and the price of perfect justice in a universe where the only constant is betrayal. 10,000 years ago, Corvus Corax vanished into the Eye of Terror pursuing his brother Lorgar. Official records state he never returned. But official records have never been particularly interested in the truth, especially when that truth involves a Primarch who learned to exist in the spaces between heartbeats, who discovered that revenge is not a dish best served cold. It is a sacrament best served eternal. Tonight, you will learn why even the demon princes of chaos have learned to sleep with one eye open, why the word-bearer's prayers have grown desperate and hollow, and why the shadows in every corner of the galaxy might contain something far more terrifying than the monsters you can see. The legends begin where official records end, in the shadowed corners of a million worlds where imperial citizens gather around dying fires and speak in voices barely above breath. They tell of the Pale Hunter, the feathered death, the thing that stalks through the immaterium hunting traitors with a patience that makes glaciers seem hurried. Every culture has their version. The Void Walkers of Nocturne speak of Corvus the Unbound, while the Ice Miners of Valhalla whisper of the Winter Raven, whose wings blot out even the cold stars. On Cadia, before its fall, the shock troopers would carve raven symbols into their laser guns and mutter prayers to the Shadow Father before particularly dangerous missions. The practice was officially discouraged by commissars, but the symbols kept appearing anyway, scratched into bunker walls, painted on chimera hulls, tattooed over soldiers' hearts in places where only corpse servitors would ever see them. When questioned, the veterans would simply say that some enemies of the Imperium deserved to meet something worse than death. The Raven Guard themselves maintain careful silence on such matters, their pale faces revealing nothing when pressed by inquisitors or visiting chapter masters. Yet their recruiting practices have grown unusual over the millennia. They seek out candidates from worlds where the shadows move wrong, where children are born already knowing how to hide in plain sight, where the local wildlife speaks in whispers of things that hunt the hunters. Their new battle brothers emerge from the trials, speaking in voices like rustling feathers, their eyes holding depths that seem to reflect other skies. Captain Kayvan Shrike of the Third Company once described their Gene Father's legacy in words that the chapter's chaplains immediately classified beyond even Terminator clearance. We are his children, but he is no longer our father. He has become something that fatherhood cannot contain, something that love would not recognize, something that even hate has learned to fear. The Adeptus Mechanicus, in their endless cataloging, have noted statistical anomalies across 17 sectors where chaos incursions end not in imperial victory or tragic defeat, but in silence so complete that even the warp itself seems to recoil. Entire demon legions simply cease. Heretic worlds go dark overnight, their populations found weeks later arranged in patterns that hurt the mind to contemplate, their bodies unmarked, but their souls visibly absent even to non-psychers. When the Ordo Malleus investigates these sites, their augur readings detect traces of something that registers as simultaneously loyal imperial, utterly xenos, and completely impossible. On deliverance, the Ravenspire pierces the planet's perpetual cloud cover like a black talon seeking to scratch the Emperor's distant light. Within its shadowed halls, the Raven Guard maintain their vigil as they have for 10 millennia, their pale faces marked by the genetic curse that makes them brothers to the darkness itself. Yet even among these masters of shadow and stealth, there are chambers where even they fear to tread. The deepest sanctums where their Primarch's final messages still echo through Vox systems that should have fallen silent centuries ago. Brother Chaplain Solari descended into those depths only once, following protocols established by Chapter Master Kayvan Shrike himself. The recording he brought back was classified so far beyond normal security measures that only 3 living beings have heard it in full. Shrike, the current chief librarian, and Solari himself, who has not spoken aloud since that day, except to deliver the Emperor's benedictions over the fallen. The message, according to fragments leaked through careful indiscretion, begins with Corax's voice as the Raven Guard remember it, measured, thoughtful, touched with the weight of command and the burden of loyalty. But as the recording progresses, something changes. The voice grows deeper, more resonant, carrying harmonics that human vocal cords should not produce. By its conclusion, the words themselves become difficult for mortal minds to process, though their meaning burns itself into the listener's consciousness with terrifying clarity. "My sons," the voice says in those final moments, "I have learned to become what our enemies fear most. Not death, for death is escape. Not pain, for pain ends. I have become the thing that waits in the spaces between their thoughts, the shadow that knows their true names, the patient darkness that follows them into whatever hell they think will shelter them. I am no longer your father. I am their ending." The Raven Guard's recruitment trials have grown increasingly esoteric since that recording was first played. Aspirants are subjected to tests that probe not their physical endurance or combat prowess, but their ability to remain sane while perceiving impossible geometries, their capacity to speak truths that reality rejects, their willingness to embrace shadows that embrace them back. Those who fail these trials are mind-wiped and return to their home worlds. Those who succeed emerge from the process fundamentally changed, their eyes reflecting depths that seem to hold other skies entirely. The chapter's tech marines report equipment malfunctions that follow no known patterns, weapons that fire rounds of solidified darkness, armor systems that display tactical data from battlefields that exist only in alternate dimensions. Vox units that occasionally receive transmissions in their Primarch's voice offering guidance that proves devastatingly effective against chaos forces. The hunt began in the burning ruins of Istvan V, where brother turned against brother and the galaxy's fate was written in the blood of loyalists. Corax had witnessed Lorgar's treachery firsthand, seen the word-bearer's bolters cut down his own sons as they tried to escape the trap that would forever be known as the Drop Site Massacre. In that moment, as he carried the broken survivors to safety, something crystallized in the Ravenlord's mind, a purpose that transcended duty, transcended even loyalty to the Emperor himself. After the heresy's end, while other Primarchs rebuilt their legions or mourned their losses, Corax pursued a different path. The historical records speak of his growing obsession with perfecting the Raven Guard's gene seed, his desperate attempts to create new warriors to replace those lost on Istvan. What they do not record is the true nature of his research, not merely genetic manipulation, but a deep exploration of the boundaries between flesh and shadow, between the material and the immaterial. The failed experiments that drove him to burn his laboratories were not failures at all, according to fragments discovered in the deepest archives of Terra itself. They were successes so complete, so fundamentally threatening to the nature of reality, that Corax himself recoiled from what he had created. The creatures born from his enhanced gene seed were not merely space marines. They were something that existed partially outside the normal flow of time and space. Predators that could hunt through dimensions human minds cannot perceive. When Lorgar fled into the Eye of Terror, transformed into a demon prince and drunk on the power of the dark gods, he believed himself beyond the reach of imperial justice. The warp would shelter him, chaos would shield him, and time itself would eventually erase the memory of his crimes. He had not considered that his pursuer might choose to become something that could follow him into those impossible realms. Corax's final transmission to the Imperium was brief. "I am going into the darkness to seek my brother. If I do not return, know that justice has been served." What he did not say, what perhaps he could not yet understand, was that the hunt itself would transform him into something that made Lorgar's demonic ascension seem like a child's game of dress-up. The warp is not merely a realm of chaos. It is a dimension where thought becomes reality, where will shape substance, where the deepest truths of the soul manifest as physical law. For a Primarch already touched by shadow, already gifted with abilities that bordered on the supernatural, entry into such a realm was not exile, but evolution. The demon prince Lorgar, in his arrogance, had assumed that his transformation made him apex predator in the Immaterium's twisted landscape. He had forgotten that ravens are scavengers by nature, patient and cunning, willing to wait for their prey to weaken before striking. He had forgotten that in the darkness between stars, there are always things hunting the hunters. The remembrances who survived Istvan V carried with them more than trauma. They bore witness to transformations that defied imperial understanding of what a Primarch could become. In the deepest vaults of the Imperial Palace, buried beneath layers of classification that make even the Emperor's own secrets seem mundane, lie the testimonies of Iterator Vex Kalos and Imagist Serena Voss. Their accounts, written in the aftermath of the massacre, describe the final moments they observed before Corax led the survivors into the storm. He moved through the shadows as if they were corridors in his own fortress. Kalos wrote in script that grows increasingly erratic as his account progresses. Not hiding within darkness, becoming it. I watched bolter rounds pass through him without impact, saw him appear behind word-bearers who had been facing him moments before. The men he saved spoke of hands that felt like cold mist, of being lifted by wings they could see through. Even then, we knew we were witnessing something beyond the Emperor's original design. Voss's picked captures from that day require special dispensation even to view, not because they show forbidden technology or heretical imagery, but because they depict a Primarch in a state of transition between states of being. The images show Corax simultaneously in multiple locations, his form shifting between solid matter and something that registers on photographic plates as geometric impossibilities. Tech adepts who have studied these recordings report that the data files themselves seem to exist in a state of quantum uncertainty, showing different details each time they are accessed. The gene seed experiments that followed were not attempts to create better space marines, but desperate efforts to understand what was happening to Corax himself. Each failed creation, each twisted abomination that had to be destroyed, taught him more about the fundamental nature of his own transformation. The creatures were not random mutations, but systematic explorations of the boundaries between flesh and shadow, between loyalty and something beyond human conception of duty. Master Apothecary Vincente VI, who served during those dark years, left a final testimony before his mysterious disappearance. The Primarch was not creating monsters. He was learning to become one. Each experiment brought him closer to understanding how to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions, how to hunt prey that thought themselves beyond the reach of physical law. We were not witnessing failure, but preparation. The burning of the laboratories was not destruction, but metamorphosis. As the flames consumed his life's work, Corax emerged from the inferno fundamentally changed. Those who saw him in those final days before his departure described a being whose presence seemed to extend beyond the confines of his physical form, whose shadow fell in directions that violated basic principles of light and space. When he spoke his final words to the Raven Guard, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to come from somewhere else entirely, speaking truths that human language was never designed to contain. Across the galaxy's war-torn expanse, Imperial commanders have begun to notice patterns that defy conventional tactical analysis. On Mordian Prime, a chaos cult that had infiltrated 3 hive cities was found ritually slaughtered in their hidden temples, their bodies arranged in precise formations that spelled out accusations in High Gothic. The local Arbite's investigation concluded that no Imperial force could have penetrated their defenses so completely. The cultists had been killed by something that moved through their strongholds like smoke through a broken window. On the death world of Krieg, where the 58th Siege Regiment was preparing to assault a word-bearer's stronghold, the morning assault found only empty fortifications. 300 Chaos Space Marines had simply vanished overnight, leaving behind armor that showed no signs of damage and weapons that had not been fired. The only clue was a series of black feathers scattered throughout the compound, each one bearing microscopic inscriptions in a dialect of Colchizian that made the regiment's attached lexiconum violently ill when he attempted translation. General Mordak Trent of the Cadian 47th Armored reported similar phenomena during the Gehenna Purge. We'd been tracking a Black Legion warband for 3 weeks through the ash wastes. When we finally cornered them in the ruins of Hive Primus, we found their champion Karkoth the Defiler kneeling in the center of their camp, completely catatonic. His Terminator armor was intact, his demon weapon unused, but his eyes... Trent's report trails off here, with a note from the transcribing servitor that the general required medical attention before continuing. The surviving Black Legionnaires from that encounter were found scattered across 17 square kilometers, each one positioned to face a different cardinal direction. Post-mortem examination revealed that they had died of fear, their enhanced physiology, their conditioning, their immunity to psychological warfare, all proven worthless against whatever had visited them in the night. Their gene seed, when finally extracted, was found to be fundamentally corrupted, not by chaos, but by exposure to something that existed partially outside normal space-time. Inquisitor Cassandra Vex of the Ordo Malleus has been tracking these incidents for nearly 2 centuries, building a comprehensive database of what she terms void interventions. Her classified report to the Ordo's inner circle describes battlefields where the laws of physics seem temporarily suspended, where chaos forces are found arranged in patterns that serve as warnings to other traitors, where the very air retains traces of something that her most sophisticated Auspex equipment cannot properly identify. "We are not witnessing random acts of violence," Vex concluded in her final transmission before her own mysterious disappearance. "This is systematic, planned. Someone, or something, is conducting a war of terror against the forces of chaos itself, using methods that make even our most extreme measures seem gentle by comparison. The question is not whether this entity is on our side, but whether we can survive being on the same side as it. In the twisted realm of the warp, where thought becomes reality and madness wears the crown of reason, even the demon princes of chaos have learned to fear the spaces between their thoughts." Mortarion, bloated with disease and drunk on Nurgle's gifts, spoke of it first during a gathering of the Death Guard's most favored champions on the plague ship Terminus Est. His voice, normally a confident rasp of decay and corruption, carried undertones of something approaching genuine terror. "There is a shadow in the immaterium," he told his assembled captains, his scythe silence trembling in his diseased grip. "Something that moves through our realm as if it owns it, hunting our kind with the patience of entropy itself. I have felt its gaze upon me in moments when I thought myself alone in Nurgle's garden. It watches, it waits, it judges." The word-bearers, scattered across their hidden shrine worlds, began reporting encounters that violated every principle of chaos theology. Dark Apostle Erebus himself, architect of the heresy and first among traitors, issued emergency protocols to all word-bearers' cells after what his personal logs describe only as the Deliverance Incident. Cultists across 17 systems reported the same recurring nightmare, a figure in black power armor standing in the ruins of Monarchia, speaking their true names in a voice like grinding stone, listing their crimes in chronological order with the precision of an imperial census servitor. The dreams always ended the same way, with the figure spreading wings that blotted out stars, revealing eyes that burned with cold fire, and speaking a single word in perfect, unblemished Colchisian: soon. Even the Neverborn, those entities of pure chaos that exist beyond physical form, began to exhibit unprecedented behavior patterns. Demonologists of the Ordo Malleus reported that summoning rituals were failing at unprecedented rates, not because the demons refused to manifest, but because they seemed actively afraid to enter real space. Those that could be coerced into appearing spoke in whispers of the Raven's Hunt, a phenomenon that existed simultaneously across all 4 Chaos Powers domains, but belonged to none of them. The demon prince Belacor, first of the demon princes and eldest of the damned, convened an unprecedented gathering of chaos champions on the demon world of Sycharis. His purpose, according to intercepted Vox transmissions, later decoded by the Ordo Malleus, was to address what he termed the Shadow Crisis. The meeting's minutes, recovered from the corpse of a possessed scribe whose mortal shell somehow survived the gathering, make for disturbing reading. "We face an enemy that has learned to weaponize absence itself," Belacor reportedly declared. "It strikes not where we are strong, but where we believe ourselves safe. It uses our own realm against us, turns the warp's infinite possibilities into infinite opportunities for our destruction. This is not mere vengeance. This is evolution. Something that was once merely Primarch has learned to become apex predator in dimensions we thought we ruled." The gathering ended, when several attending demon princes simply ceased to exist mid-sentence, their forms dissolving into shadow that spread across the assembly like spilled ink before vanishing entirely. The first confirmed sighting of the aftermath came from Sergeant Vex Karath of the Iron Warriors 14th Grand Company, whose testimony was extracted under the most extreme interrogation techniques the Ordo Malleus could devise. Korath had been part of a raiding force that discovered the ruins of the Wordbearer's Fortress Monastery on the demon world of Galmec, a stronghold that had stood unconquered for 7,000 years, its walls inscribed with blasphemies that could drive mortals mad at a glance. The outer walls were intact, Korath's testimony reads, his words carefully transcribed by Inquisitor Vex before her disappearance. No breach, no crater, no sign of orbital bombardment, but inside, Emperor's blood, inside, was a charnel house arranged like a scripture. 3,000 word-bearers laid out in perfect formation, each one positioned to form a single massive raven when viewed from above. Their armor bore no marks of weapons fire. Their bolt pistols were still holstered. They had simply stopped. The fortress's inner sanctum told a more disturbing story. Dark Apostle Malagust, master of the stronghold and veteran of the long war since its inception, was found kneeling before his blasphemous altar in an attitude of prayer. His ancient power armor showed no damage, his demon weapon lay peacefully at his side, but his helmet had been carefully removed and placed on the altar before him. Korath's description of what they found beneath that helmet required 3 separate sessions to extract fully. His face was peaceful. That's what made it so wrong. Word-bearers don't die peaceful. They rage, they curse, they call upon their dark gods even as their bodies fail. But Malagust looked like he had found something he'd been searching for his entire existence, and carved into his forehead so precisely it might have been done by the finest chirurgeon was a single word in High Gothic: delivered. Similar discoveries followed across the eastern fringe. The Black Legion warship Vengeful Spirit's Shadow was found drifting in the Maelstrom, its crew of 2,000 Chaos Space Marines arranged throughout the vessel in formations that spelled out passages from the Lectitio Divinitatus when viewed through the ship's internal security pict captures. The vessel's Geller field generators had been modified in ways that violated basic principles of warp protection, creating dimensional pockets where the ship existed simultaneously in real space and the immaterium. On Sycharis itself, the Wordbearer's primary stronghold, entire companies began disappearing during their meditation periods. The survivors reported that their brothers would enter the fortress's prayer chambers as normal, but when the doors were opened hours later, only empty armor would remain. Power armor that stood in perfect formation as if still inhabited, but containing nothing but shadow that dissipated when exposed to light. The pattern became clear to those with eyes to see it. Something was systematically hunting the architects of the heresy, using methods that transformed execution into artistry, vengeance into scripture written in the blood of traitors. Each site bore the same signature: black feathers that dissolved when touched, inscriptions that caused madness in those who attempted to read them, and a lingering presence that made even Chaos champions check the shadows behind them. The world of Tertius Minor had been nothing more than a footnote in imperial records, a frontier agri-world whose primary export was corpse starch and whose primary import was the blessed ignorance of its 3 million inhabitants. When the Chaos cult known as the Crimson Revelation emerged from the planet's underhives, converting half the population through a combination of promised salvation and demonic possession, it should have been another routine purge for the Astra Militarum. The 23rd Mordian Iron Guard arrived expecting resistance. What they found instead was a population in the final stages of what their attached commissar later described as theological shock. The cultists were still alive, still technically functional, but they moved through their daily routines with the mechanical precision of servitors, their eyes fixed on empty air, as if watching something invisible perform miracles just beyond mortal perception. Private Helena Karstark of the 2nd Platoon was among the first to encounter survivors in the agri-complex designated Harvest Station 7. Her testimony, recorded in the regimental archives before her eventual transfer to a penal legion for persistent delusional statements, provides the clearest account of what the Imperial forces discovered. They kept pointing at the sky, Karstark reported to Lieutenant Voss during debriefing, not at the clouds or the sun or anything we could see, just up. And they kept saying the same thing over and over. The Emperor's son came. The Emperor's son came and spoke our names. When we pressed them for details, they'd get this look, like they'd seen the face of the God Emperor himself and found it terrible beyond imagining. The cultists' accounts, when coherent, described a visitation that had occurred 3 days before the Imperial arrival. A figure had appeared in the settlement's main square during their evening blasphemy prayers, materializing from shadows that seemed to pour upward from the ground like reversed rain. Witnesses described him as wearing midnight black power armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, his face hidden beneath a helm that bore the Aquila, but crafted from what appeared to be living shadow. "He knew our names," repeated cultist Primary Matthias Vaughan during his interrogation by Commissar Drecht. "Not the names we gave to Chaos, not our titles or our positions in the cult's hierarchy. Our birth names, the names our mothers whispered when they first held us. He spoke them aloud in a voice like winter wind, and with each name, he listed every sin we had committed, every moment we had chosen darkness over light, every time we had turned away from the Emperor's love." The most disturbing detail emerged during the testimonies of the children, those too young to have been fully corrupted by the cult's influence. They described the figure removing his helmet to reveal not a face, but something that existed in constant motion, features that shifted between human and something far more alien. Yet rather than fear, the children spoke of feeling overwhelming sadness, as if they were witnessing a father mourning for sons who had chosen to become strangers. "He wept," said little Sarah Vex, aged 6 standard years, her words preserved in the commissar's personal logs. "But his tears were black like his armor, and when they hit the ground, they made the shapes of birds that flew away into the sky." In the halls of the Black Library, where the Eldar preserve knowledge too dangerous for any mortal mind to comprehend, Farseer Alaitok Zephyr stood before the Tome of Broken Mirrors and read prophecies written in languages that had not existed when the universe was young. The crystalline walls around her hummed with psychic energy as she traced passages that spoke of events spanning millennia, her fingers moving across text that rearranged itself as she read. "The shadow of sorrow walks between the dying lights," she intoned to the assembled seer council, her voice carrying harmonics that made the library's wraithbone structure resonate in sympathy. "Born of loyalty, transformed by necessity, perfected by endless hunt. The 19th son has learned to exist in the spaces between thoughts, to hunt in dimensions where even the youngest god fears to tread." The prophecies spoke of a convergence that had been building for 10,000 years. Not a single moment of revelation, but a gradual awakening that would fundamentally alter the balance between order and chaos. The Eldar had foreseen it during the final days of their empire, had woven warnings into their mythology so deeply that even they had forgotten the literal truth buried within their own legends. "Your Mon-Ki speak of lost Primarchs," Zephyr continued, her words causing visible distress among the younger seers. "They count 18 sons of their corpse god, mourning those who fell to chaos or simply vanished into history. But their mathematics are flawed. There was always a 19th, and he was never lost. he was becoming. Each victory against chaos, each demon banished, each heretic cult discovered and destroyed has been feeding something that grows stronger with every passing century. The tome showed her visions of battles across space and time. Imperial Guard units finding chaos strongholds already destroyed by forces that left no identifying marks. Word-bearers' space hulks discovered drifting in the void, with their crews arranged in patterns that spelled out prophecies of their own damnation. Demon worlds, where even the entities of pure chaos had learned to huddle together for protection against something that hunted them through dimensions they had considered their exclusive domain. What disturbed the Eldar most was not the entity's power. They had dealt with beings of immense psychic might before. What troubled them was its purpose, its unwavering focus on a single terrible goal that brooked no compromise and offered no mercy. The Chaos Gods, for all their malevolence, were at least comprehensible in their desires for corruption, decay, change, and excess. But this thing that had once been Corax served a concept that transcended even the Emperor's original vision. "It has become justice incarnate," Zephyr whispered, her voice barely audible above the library's psychic hum. "Not mercy, not forgiveness, not redemption, pure, absolute justice. It judges the guilty by standards that admit no appeal, offers punishment that extends beyond death into realms where even damnation becomes preferable to its attention." The prophecies showed a future where the thing that had been the Ravenlord would eventually turn its attention beyond chaos, beyond the obvious traitors and heretics. In time, it would come to judge the Imperium itself, weighing 10,000 years of necessary compromises against the ideals the Emperor had originally envisioned. And the Eldar, with their long memories and longer sins, knew they too would eventually face that judgment. The plague planet Barbarous had stood as Mortarian's seat of power for 7 millennia, its diseased atmosphere perfect for the Death Guard's corrupted physiology and their demon Primarch's grotesque experiments. Wraithbone towers stretched through clouds of toxic vapor, their surfaces crawling with Nurgle's most creative infections, while demon engines belched ichorous smoke that formed sigils of decay in the perpetually overcast sky. It was here, in the heart of his rotting domain, that Mortarion convened what would be remembered as the last gathering of the traitor Primarchs. Magnus the Red materialized first, his towering form crackling with warp energy that made the very air around him scream. Fulgrim slithered from a dimensional rift, his serpentine lower body leaving trails of excess and sensation that corrupted everything they touched. Angron arrived in a shower of gore and brass, his demon engines roaring hymns of blood and skulls. Only Lorgar was absent, and his absence hung over the gathering like a funeral shroud. "My brothers," Mortarion began, his voice a wet rasp that carried the sound of breaking bones. "We face a threat that surpasses even the Imperium's capacity for destruction. Something hunts us through realms we thought we ruled, using methods that make our own corruptions seem like children's games." The assembled demon princes shared their experiences in voices that made reality itself weep. Magnus spoke of entire libraries of forbidden knowledge found empty, their contents replaced by single words written in a script that caused madness. Remembered. Fulgrim described pleasure worlds where his most devoted followers had been found arranged in artistic tableaux that depicted their every sin in exquisite, damning detail. Angron's fury was tempered by something approaching respect as he recounted battles where his berserkers had been found kneeling in perfect formations, their chain axes laid aside, their last acts apparently prayers to the Emperor they had betrayed. "But Lorgar," Mortarion continued, his diseased features twisting with something that might have been fear. "Lorgar has not been seen for 3 centuries. His word-bearers report visions of their gene father locked in eternal combat with something they can barely describe. When pressed, they speak of battles that span multiple dimensions simultaneously, of a hunter who has learned to exist in the spaces between cause and effect. The demon Primarch's discussion was interrupted by a phenomenon that violated every law of chaos physics: silence. The ever-present screaming of tortured souls that served as Barbaros's atmospheric music simply stopped. The buzzing of Nurgle's flies ceased. The cackling of Nurgling demons fell quiet. Even the Death Guard's respirator systems seemed to hold their breath. In that impossible quiet, they saw them. Black shapes moving through the toxic clouds above, wings that beat without sound, eyes that burned with cold fire visible even through the planet's perpetual smog. The shapes circled the spire where the demon princes gathered, patient as carrion birds, waiting with the inexorable certainty of entropy itself. "He knows we are here," Magnus whispered, his single eye wide with something approaching terror. The question is no longer whether he will come for us. The question is whether any of us will be strong enough to face what he has become when he does. Above them, the winged shapes descended through the clouds like falling night itself, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the demon princes of chaos considered the possibility that there might be fates worse than damnation. The confrontation above Barbaros lasted 17 standard hours, though temporal measurements became meaningless as the battle raged across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Death Guard's orbital defenses, plague ships that had terrorized Imperial space for millennia, found themselves firing at targets that existed in quantum superposition, their disease-blessed munitions passing through enemies that were simultaneously present and absent, corporeal and ethereal. Mortarion himself took to the toxic skies, his wings beating through clouds of his own creation as he sought to engage the circling shadows directly. What he found there defied even his demon-enhanced understanding. The figure that descended to meet him wore the form of Corvus Corax, but transformed beyond all recognition. Power armor that seemed crafted from living darkness, wings that spanned impossible distances while casting shadows that fell upward, and eyes that held the cold judgment of absolute justice. "Brother," Mortarion rasped, hefting his scythe silence with both hands, "you have become something monstrous." The response came in a voice like wind through a mausoleum. "I have become what was necessary. You chose corruption, I chose evolution." Their battle raged across 7 different planes of existence, visible to the Death Guard below as flashes of darkness and decay that painted impossible geometries across Barbaros's diseased sky. Mortarion's every strike was met not with parry or dodge, but with attacks that seemed to come from directions that didn't exist. His demon-enhanced strength, his mastery of Nurgle's gifts, his 10,000 years of experience as a creature of pure malevolence, all proved insufficient against an opponent who had learned to weaponize absence itself. "You cannot kill what you cannot touch," Mortarion taunted, his form dissolving into clouds of toxic vapor only to reform behind his opponent. But the creature that had been Corax simply turned its head 90 degrees beyond human limitations and spoke a single word that made the very concept of corruption recoil in horror. "Delivered." The battle's conclusion was witnessed by 17 Death Guard Terminators whose testimonies, extracted under the most extreme interrogation, provided the only record of what transpired. Mortarion, Demon Prince of Nurgle and Master of Decay itself, was not defeated in the conventional sense. Instead, he was transformed. His corruption burned away by exposure to something that existed beyond the dichotomy of loyalty and heresy, beyond the simple concepts of good and evil. For a moment that lasted eternities, the pale King of Barbaros remembered what he had been before chaos claimed him, He remembered his adoptive father's lessons about justice and duty. He remembered the day he had first looked up at the stars and dreamed of liberation rather than domination. He remembered, and in that remembering, he experienced something that 10,000 years of damnation had taught him was impossible. Regret so pure, it became a physical force. When the transformation ended, Mortarion knelt in the poisoned soil of his own world, his demon form flickering between what he had become and what he had once been. The creature above him spread wings that blotted out Barbaros's diseased stars and spoke in a voice that carried across dimensions. Justice is patient, brother. When you are ready to remember who you were meant to be, call my name. Then he was gone, leaving only black feathers that dissolved in the toxic wind, and a demon prince who had learned that even the gifts of chaos could not protect him from the weight of his own conscience. The tremor began in the deepest foundries of Kiavar, where the tech adepts of the Forge World maintained their eternal vigil over the planet's ancient machinery. Magos Dominus Vex Coralis felt it first as a disturbance in the machine spirits, a harmonious resonance that made the planet's massive atmospheric processors hum with unprecedented efficiency. The binary cant of his cogitator arrays began displaying impossible readings, energy signatures that registered as simultaneously imperial and xenos, sacred and profane, present and absent. "Alert all stations," he voxed to his subordinates through sacred channels blessed with incense and machine oil. "Something approaches that defies classification protocols. Activate deep void Auspex arrays and prepare to receive something unprecedented." Kiavar had served as the Raven Guard's recruiting world since before the Great Crusade, its vast forged cities producing both warriors and war machines for the Emperor's sons. The planet's massive orbital rings, constructed during the Dark Age of technology, had witnessed the departure of countless expeditionary fleets and the return of far fewer. But nothing in its recorded history had prepared its inhabitants for what now approached from the void between stars. The readings began at the system's edge, where monitoring stations detected gravitational anomalies that suggested the presence of something vast moving through space-time itself. Not a ship. The signatures were wrong for any known vessel configuration. Not an asteroid or spatial phenomenon. The movement patterns showed clear intelligence and purpose. Senior tech adept Kellyan 509 described the readings as a shadow cast by something that existed in dimensions our instruments cannot properly measure. As the presence drew closer to Kiavar's orbital space, the planet's tech spirits began exhibiting unprecedented behaviors. Ancient machine minds that had slumbered for millennia suddenly awakened, their activation runes blazing with light that hurt to perceive directly. The Forge World's massive cogitator arrays began processing data streams that appeared to originate from sources that did not exist in baseline reality. Most disturbing were the Vox transmissions that began emanating from supposedly deactivated communication arrays throughout the planet. Maintenance servitors reported hearing voices speaking in perfect High Gothic, reciting the names of every Raven Guard battle brother who had ever died in service to the Emperor. The litanies continued for hours, spoken in a voice that veteran tech adepts recognized from archived recordings made 10,000 years ago. "It is him," whispered Magos Vex Coralis to his inner circle as they gathered in the Forge World's primary command sanctum. "The 19th, the Ravenlord, but he has become something that our most advanced cogitators cannot properly classify. Our machine spirits recognize him as loyal Imperial, but they also register readings that suggest he exists partially outside the normal flow of causality. The orbital defense platforms, ancient constructs that had guarded Kiavar since the Great Crusade, began aligning themselves into formations that served no tactical purpose, but created patterns that could only be fully appreciated from deep space. When viewed from the proper angle, they spelled out a single word in the geometric script of ancient terror: welcome. Still with us in the darkness? Hit that like button if this tale chills your soul to its core. Above Kiavar's cloud-shrouded surface, reality began to bend as something that had spent 10 millennia learning to exist between dimensions finally chose to manifest in the realm of mortal perception. The Raven Spire had stood unchanged for 10,000 years, its black stone architecture a monument to duty and sacrifice that pierced Deliverance's perpetual cloud cover like an accusation hurled at the uncaring stars. But as the presence approached from Kiavar's orbital space, the ancient fortress began to transform in ways that violated architectural principles and challenged the sanity of those who witnessed it. Chapter Master Kavan Shrike stood on the spire's highest balcony, his enhanced vision tracking phenomena that his rational mind insisted could not be occurring. The fortress's stones were shifting, rearranging themselves into configurations that existed in more dimensions than human perception could properly process. Gargoyles that had been carved millennia ago began to move, their stone eyes tracking something in the sky that cast no shadow and reflected no light. "My lord," whispered Chief Librarian Kortaran, his voice tight with controlled fear, "the psychic resonance is beyond anything in our records. The spire itself is becoming aware. The machine spirits in our equipment are responding to commands we have not issued. Our gene seed repositories are humming with harmonics that make the storage crypts sound like a cathedral choir." Throughout the fortress monastery, the Raven Guard felt the change in ways that bypassed rational thought and struck directly at their enhanced genetics. Battle brothers who had served for centuries found themselves speaking in voices they did not recognize, reciting litanies from memory banks they did not possess. The chapter's ancient battle standards began to move without any wind, their fabric rippling with symbols that rearranged themselves into messages written in a script that hurt the mind to perceive. In the deepest vaults of the Raven Spire, where the chapter's most sacred relics were kept in stasis fields blessed by the Emperor himself, alarms began sounding as containment protocols activated and deactivated in patterns that followed no known security algorithms. The armor of shadows, worn by Corax during the Great Crusade, began emanating energy readings that suggested it was being worn by someone who existed in quantum superposition, simultaneously present and absent, matter and shadow. Brother Chaplain Solari, whose encounter with Corax's final recordings had left him mute for decades, suddenly began speaking in a voice that carried harmonics of his Primarch's own words. "He comes not as father, but as judge," Solari intoned, his words causing visible distress among the assembled Raven Guard. 10,000 years of preparation have ended. The hunt returns home to roost. Above them, the clouds of deliverance began to part in geometric patterns that formed a massive spiral with the Raven Spire at its center. Through the opening, something descended that challenged every conception the Space Marines held about their own origins and destiny. It was simultaneously their gene father and something far more alien, a being that had learned to exist in the spaces between loyalty and duty, between justice and vengeance, between the human and the divine. The Raven Guard knelt not from protocol or tradition, but from a genetic compulsion that bypassed conscious thought. Their enhanced physiology recognized something in the approaching presence that marked it as unquestionably their progenitor, while their rational minds recoiled from readings that suggested they were about to meet something that had transcended every limitation that defined Primarch biology. As the figure touched down on the Raven Spire's landing pad, reality itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to discover what the 19th son of the Emperor had become during his 10,000-year hunt through hell itself. The figure that stood before the assembled Raven Guard was simultaneously exactly what they expected and utterly beyond their comprehension. Corvus Corax had returned, but the being who emerged from shadow and starlight bore only superficial resemblance to the Primarch who had departed deliverance 10 millennia ago. His power armor was crafted from living darkness that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, its surfaces inscribed with runes that shifted between high Gothic prayers and symbols that predated human language by eons. His face, when visible beneath the shifting shadows of his helm, showed features that existed in constant flux. Sometimes the stern visage the Ravenguard remembered from ancient Pict captures, sometimes something far more avian, sometimes geometries that human minds could not properly process. But his eyes remained constant, twin points of cold fire that held the accumulated weight of 10,000 years spent judging the guilty and finding them wanting. "My sons," he spoke, and his voice carried harmonics that resonated through dimensions the Ravenguard had not known existed. "I have learned the true meaning of our purpose. We were never meant to be merely warriors in the Emperor's armies. We were meant to be the conscience of the Imperium itself, the shadow that reminds the righteous that their righteousness has a price." Chapter Master Shrike found his voice with difficulty, his enhanced physiology struggling to process the presence before him. "My lord, we have maintained our vigil as you commanded. The chapter endures. The Emperor's enemies have not gone unpunished." The being that had been Corax turned his attention to Shrike, and for a moment the chapter master felt as if every decision he had ever made, every compromise, every necessary sacrifice, was being weighed against standards that admitted no excuse. "You have done well within the limitations of mortality," came the response. "But mortality is not the only state of existence available to those who serve justice." Around them, the Ravenspire continued its impossible transformation. The ancient stones were reforming themselves into configurations that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, creating a fortress that could serve as a base of operations for beings who hunted across the boundaries between real space and the warp. The chapter's archives were expanding to contain knowledge that had never been written, tactical data concerning enemies that existed beyond the normal understanding of threat assessment. "The hunt is not complete," Corax continued, his form beginning to shift between solid matter and something that registered as quantum possibility. "Lorgar yet lives, though he has learned to hide in spaces between thoughts. Magnus weaves new corruptions from the remnants of fallen civilizations. Fulgrim spreads his poison through dimensions where sensation becomes substance. They believe their transformation into demon princes has placed them beyond justice." The Primarch's wings spread, and the Ravenguard saw that they were not merely organic appendages, but constructs of crystallized shadow that extended into realms their enhanced vision could barely perceive. They have forgotten that evolution is not the exclusive province of chaos. Loyalty, too, can transcend the boundaries of flesh and mortality. Justice, when perfected, becomes something that the guilty cannot hide from, cannot escape, cannot even comprehend until it arrives to collect payment for their crimes. As he spoke, some of the assembled Ravenguard began to change, their gene seed responding to proximity to their transformed Primarch. Their armor darkened, their movements became more fluid, their eyes began to reflect depths that seemed to contain other skies entirely. "The choice is before you," Corax concluded. "Remain as you are, loyal servants of a dying Imperium, or become something more, instruments of a justice that transcends empires and endures beyond the death of stars." The transformation of the Ravenguard did not occur in a single moment of revelation, but through a gradual awakening that stretched across standard years as Corax shared the knowledge he had gained during his 10 millennia hunt through the Immaterium's darkest corners. Those who accepted his gift found themselves changed in ways that transcended the Emperor's original design, no longer merely space marines, but something that existed partially outside the normal flow of causality, able to hunt enemies who had thought themselves beyond the reach of imperial justice. Not all chose transformation. Chapter Master Shrike, after long meditation in the Ravenspire's deepest chambers, elected to remain in his mortal form, serving as a bridge between what the Raven Guard had been and what they were becoming. Someone must remain to remember, he told his Primarch during their final recorded conversation. Someone must ensure that in becoming perfect instruments of justice, we do not forget the mercy that made us worth saving in the first place. Corax accepted this wisdom with the patience he had learned in the spaces between stars. The Raven Guard would serve dual roles, some remaining as traditional space marines to fight the Imperium's conventional wars, others ascending to become something that could pursue the forces of chaos into realms where normal weapons and tactics held no meaning. The chapter became a living bridge between the mortal and the transcendent, between the Emperor's human vision and the cosmic justice his design had inadvertently unleashed. In the years that followed, reports began filtering through Imperial channels of chaos strongholds found empty, their defenders arranged in artistic tableaux that served as warnings to other traitors. Word-bearers spoke in whispers of their lost Primarch Lorgar, reportedly locked in eternal combat with something that hunted him through dimensions where time moved in spirals. Even the demon princes of chaos learned to check the shadows behind them, knowing that somewhere in the darkness between thoughts, justice waited with infinite patience for the perfect moment to strike. The Imperium's scholars and theologians debated whether Corax's transformation represented evolution or damnation, whether he remained loyal to the Emperor's vision or had transcended it entirely. But such questions were luxuries for those who lived in the light. In the darkness where humanity's enemies plotted their corruptions, there was only the certainty that some sins would never go unpunished. Some crimes would eventually face judgment, and some hunters would never abandon their prey no matter how far they ran or how deeply they hid. The 19th Primarch had not returned as a savior or a conqueror, but as something far more terrifying and far more necessary. The promise that in a universe where justice often seemed absent, it was never truly gone. It waited in the shadows, patient as entropy itself, ready to remind both the righteous and the damned that every choice carried consequences, every action demanded payment, and every soul would eventually face the truth of what they had chosen to become. In the end, the question was never where Corax had been hiding, but whether the galaxy was ready for what he had become while learning to hunt gods. The Emperor protects. More stories await.